Hey everyone, it's Dr. Rick. So the lecture that we held yesterday, sponsored by Verilife, went great. Not only did it, I feel, get a lot of my patients and others who aren't my patients, who are currently using medical cannabis for their disease process, it got them to understand a new level of dialing in and fine-tuning. But it also, I believe, got a lot of patients that were not necessarily mine, but just to call them clients, potential clients, to highly consider using this as a medicinal substitute and or correlative to their current medicines or herbs, just to modify some of the disease process. So we'll get into the video now, or at least the lecture. This is exactly how I presented it, with a couple more slides, since I kind of went off the cuff at the lecture. We didn't have the television, didn't show the slides, I just talked. In addition to Dr. Derek Jiwan and Mike Alexander from Verilife. So, cannabis. We have to understand, it helps with 101 cannabis to understand, or at least medical cannabis to understand how to classify this thing. It's not, it is a medicine, but you have to understand it comes from a plant. So Cannabinaceae is the genus. Cannabis is a family, and you can say that the species breaks down into further, the categorization is a little bit different, but if you just understand that there's Cannabis sativa, Cannabis indica, and Cannabis ruderalis. These two are the things that we know of as the basic building blocks in the medical dispensary world. This one is essentially hemp. And hemp does, it falls under the same family, but has slightly different properties, and we'll talk about that later because there are some people who had questions, and I'll put that on a separate video, but about the use of CBD from hemp and then the medical cannabis from the dispensary. So we'll get into that later. So don't forget to subscribe to me down below and hit the alert button to find out when I do new videos, because I'll probably have a lot of other videos dovetailing off of this lecture series. So Cannabis 101. You have to understand the endocannabinoid system. The endocannabinoid system is very, very important. But you don't have to be a scientist and go back into Biochemistry 101. I think all of you know that there is a parasympathetic system. That's the one that helps you relax and digest and fall in love and have sex and repair. So that is a parasympathetic system. And then there's a sympathetic system. You probably all know that one more. Parasympathetic was, we'll just not go into too much details. We'll just keep it very simple. But the sympathetic system is one that you have flight or flight. So the adrenals, norepinephrine, epinephrine, catecholamines, they all come from the sympathetic system. There's a lot of receptors in the body when you release those hormones, and those hormones attach to the receptors and they induce a reaction. Fight or flight. Fast heart rate, fast blood pressure, fast thinking, narrow-minded view, and get out of there or fight and defend. The parasympathetic system also releases hormone, serotonin, oxytocin, and it helps to, what I mentioned before, calm and sleep and reproduce and digest. Well, there is also an endocannabinoid system, after having said all that, but if you understand these two, the endocannabinoid system, actually, I refer to it as corporate. So I'll get to that in a second, but it overlays everything and regulates all the other systems. So these two are very important for life. This one controls over and watches. It can either speed up or turn down or regulate these other systems so you don't get burned out, usually. So I'll talk about vitamin deficiency and endocannabinoid deficiency later on in the slideshow, but if you come to my clinic, I think one of the basic ways I help patients get back on their journey to healthy lifestyle is taking care of deficiency. Whether that deficiency is more organic, like magnesium, vitamin D, B12, iron, or whether the deficiency is organic, like not having enough calming practice, not being in nature, not having an exercise routine. Those are deficiencies too. And if you can make somebody a little whole by getting their deficiencies taken care of, then great. So I propose that the endocannabinoid system is good as a regulator, but I think that we don't listen to ourselves and we get burned out. So that regulator, with what I'm going to show you, has hormones to send off and regulate. The hormones get decreased because we just get burned out. I think it's a deficiency. So if you take care of the deficiency, temporarily with exogenous hormones or exogenous lookalikes, then you might be able to jack up your regulatory system so that these two other guys will be able to get regulated better. So, just to review, hopefully it's not too bright here, but this is a picture of the autonomic system. There's the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. Parasympathetic, if you can see it, I might have to turn. I'm going to try to turn down this contrast a bit. But if I can't, this is the parasympathetic system. It just has a few things, especially the vagus nerve that controls what I mentioned earlier. This is a sympathetic system and has more nerves that fire off fast because that's more urgent than digesting or making love. So you can see this is a plethora of different nerves and pathways and hormone possibilities. This is just a couple. Well, I refer to the sympathetic system as Metallica, fight or flight. I refer to the parasympathetic system as Kenny G, or Luther Vandross, but I'm from the 80s. Now, if you think about the endocannabinoid system, there I refer to it as corporate, because corporate overlies your front desk, your clinic, your back end clinic. Corporate comes in, they're watching all the time, especially with big industry, but they come in and regulate, they come out again, and you won't really recognize them, but they're always in the background. And it is important to have corporate, I believe, for most businesses to survive, but sometimes corporate, if it gets burned out or has the wrong people, they're not going to help anybody and your business will get worse. So this is a picture of the endocannabinoid system. Hopefully you can see this, but there are receptors everywhere as far as endocannabinoids. The endocannabinoid receptors are commonly referred to as CB1 and CB2. The cannabinoid receptor 1, it should be CBR1, CBR2, but we don't have to get into semantics. And just because those are the most, they are, of all the systems I just mentioned, they have the most receptors in the body. So you wonder, why would the endocannabinoid system, why would you have to have receptors in the body for marijuana? So technically, it's not for marijuana, and I'll explain in a second, but even down to the nerve. This is a synapse. This is one nerve ending, and it usually goes to the other nerve ending and fires off that electric potential, just like this is all nerve. Well, this is a blow up of the nerve ending. So for those nerves to work properly, you have to have essentially a charge transferred from one axon or nerve ending through a synapse, through chemicals and hormones, to the next axon or nerve ending until you see that cascade of nerve endings kind of fire off, initially from the brain, but ending up with making a fist, for example. Well, each of those nerve endings, the synapse, has a specific receptor, CB1, CB2. Again, science has shown, data has shown that you have these receptors for exogenous or phytocannabinoids or endogenous cannabinoids. That's what the interesting part is. So again, I mentioned that corporate is an internal homeostatic regulatory system. It's kind of just in the background, almost like your computer has a watchdog system like Norton that always scans. It comes in, fixes things, and you just goes back into the background when you don't notice it. But the endocannabinoid system is made up of a couple things. Number one would be the endocannabinoids. Like I was mentioning, you can actually make your own. AEA and 2-AG are the two things that you can make on your own. And I'll talk about them in a second. And those are endocannabinoids. They are essentially the things that stimulate these nerve endings. So you wonder, if you are wondering, why do we have to have plants and why do we have so many receptors for plants? It's because we produce our own essential reaction, I guess you can call it your own body cannabis reaction. So it's not that we are built for the plant, we make our own and the plant happens to be there. So the other part of the endocannabinoid system is those things called receptors, CB1, CB2, and TRPV1. Those are the little nerve ending receptors that stimulate the transference of the electric current. And then finally you'll have regulatory enzymes that control and play a part of how these get released, how these get degraded, how these reset. You don't have to know about them. It's the two first bullet points. So let's talk about the system. So there's several different receptors in the endocannabinoid system. There's CB1, CB2, GPR119, GPR18, TRPV1 I mentioned, and GPR55. It's not really important. These two are the most important. And hopefully you can pick this up, but CB1 is, those receptors are mostly in nerve tissue, especially the brain. There's just tons of those receptors in the brain waiting to be stimulated or repressed. And then the CB2 receptors are mostly digestive and autoimmune or immune cells. So white blood cells, red blood cells, macrophages, glial cells in the brain. Because somebody had a great question at the conference about is it safe for people with regards to brain? And I'll mention that in the next video, so please subscribe. So why do you ask I have to talk about the receptors? Because it's important. That's essentially what happens. That's how the body sends its messages, and from the brain, which is the master regulator, it has to get instantaneous messages to the most distal parts and to every body system that we know of immediately. So you can affect homeostasis. React to food, react to love, react to danger, react to pain. So this is some of the weeds. I don't want to get into the weeds too much, so to speak, the weeds, but this is that picture of the nerve ending to a nerve beginning blown up. And you can see that there's something called AEA, I mentioned it earlier, that's an endocannabinoid, and then 2AG, that's also an endocannabinoid. So if you see, AEA is made in the nerve cell. It's not that you're eating medical cannabis and you have to put it in there, you actually make it on your own. So, and 2AG is also made in the nerve cell. So these two things are components that are made by your body automatically, so you don't even have to take the plant, the cannabinoid plant, to have the effect. You can actually make your own, but my hypothesis I present to my patients is that you're probably lacking it. There's things like when you're talking about diabetes, you're talking about insulin. Insulin's very good, but sometimes you will have, because of time and damage, insulin resistance. That's when a hormone doesn't react to a receptor properly. Well, I think my proposition is that you can actually have endocannabinoid resistance and or fatigue. And when that happens, because you haven't fixed the root cause, you might have to supplant with an exocannabinoid or a phytocannabinoid from outside the body. So that's all I'm going to mention. I do want to mention this thing too, which this nice schematic points to how if you stimulate the CB1 receptor, you can actually end up with cell death, which is good if you're talking about precancer cells or cells that are senescent. If you have those cells and you push them over as far as cell death, you essentially take care of cancer forming. So I think there is value also in the use of phytocannabinoids, medical cannabis for cancer. And again, that was a great question by the people in the audience, and I'll get to that in my Q&A video that I'll put up later. So I had some questions too for the audience, and one of them, which system, sympathetic, parasympathetic, or endocannabinoid, has the most receptors in the body? And obviously I just gave that away. It's the endocannabinoid system. So going on, the two endocannabinoids that we make that are essentially the same, lookalikes, has medical cannabis, the active ingredients, are AEA, or anandamide, and 2AG, or 2-arachidonyl glycerol. And those two we make, as I mentioned. So if you make a good amount, then you should be okay. The problem is we probably get burned out, don't make enough. Or we make enough, but the overwhelming external stimulus is wanting us to get more because we're just fighting a battle uphill. So again, just as a refresher, endocannabinoid deficiency, endo means inside the body, you make it on your own, that's these two. And exocannabinoid supplementation would be if you can't develop your own calming practice. I mentioned that in the conference. I had a yoga instructor I knew from Bodhi Prem in Arlington Heights, and Krissa really knows how to guide people into calm and developing meditation or breath awareness or just the yoga poses. And when you go through a class, you should check her out too. When you go through a class of yoga, most of the time, if you have a great instructor, you will feel a sense of calm. And that's usually because you are just excreting, not excreting, but making a whole bunch of anandamide. Again, if you make a whole bunch of anandamide, you will have peace and calm. So if you don't know how to develop that, and I always stress mindful practice and breath exercise and guided imagery as a part of a lifestyle, healthy lifestyle, then you should get a coach to teach you. Because if you can't afford the phytocannabinoids, the medical cannabis, get your own going. But you have to have a practice. You can't just expect to be a great meditator overnight. So I don't want to go off track too much. But so again, question I throw to the audience: which is an endocannabinoid? AEA, 2AG, or THC, CBD? And obviously I just gave you the answer. Endocannabinoid, AEA, or anandamide, and 2AG. Exocannabinoid or phytocannabinoid, THC, CBD, from the plant. Cannabis sativa, cannabis indica, or cannabis ruderalis. So exocannabinoids, as I mentioned, there's a lot of them. So you can actually have, and I just listed everything: THC, CBD, CBC, CBG, CBDV, THCV, CBDA, THCA. And all of those can be derived from the plant properly, but there's ways to take it out. And some people also had a good question from the audience about the extraction process with regards to whether distillation, whether using oil, whether using hexane, which is butane was specifically brought up, would be safe. And yes, I think it's safe. Those are all different ways to get the out of the flower, get the active ingredient, dial it down to the exact ones you want. There's about 100 to 400 different cannabinoids in the flower. So if you smoke the flower, great, but you have an overwhelming amount of uncontrollable receptors, or not receptors, but ligands from the plant that are in your body at the same time. So the chance is higher that you're going to have a side effect. Ligands come from the plant. If you can take the extract of that plant and just dial in specifically which terpene you want, which endocannabinoid you want, or exocannabinoid you want, phytocannabinoid you want, then you have less side effects and more direct action of what you want. You can dial in what you want to have dialed in. Okay, cancer fighting, autoimmune fighting, work on PTSD, just sleep if you want sleep. So I think that's the beauty of all this. And unfortunately, there's always going to be more this statement that more research is needed. And yes, there's a lot of great information out of Israel because they've been doing this for a long time. The U.S. has been, I think, blockading the investment in studies because it's still, unfortunately, listed as illegal and useless and with high addictive potential. So it's kind of a dichotomy. We allow it at the state level, but we don't allow it at the Fed level. We allow the FDA to approve CBD in Epidiolex, which is by GW Pharmaceutical, but we say you can't grow it and it's illegal. So doctors are allowed to certify at the state level, but doctors can be taken. They can take their. We can have our credentials taken away if the Fed wants to, because it's illegal. It's totally screwed up, but hopefully with time it'll improve. There's also synthetic cannabinoids, which are the dangerous ones. Well, not really dangerous ones, but the ones that are produced in the pharmacy. I have, this is what I'm talking about as far as a dangerous one that shouldn't ever be used. Spice, K2, Joker, Black Mamba, Kush, and Ironic. And there's other names for it too. Those are the ones that most of the kids, adolescents, are using in the country. Whether because they get it from their friends, it's easy access, or they can't get the medical cannabis, which is changing a bit, or they just like the high from this. You have to be really careful because these things, number one, they're not federally regulated. Number two, there's probably a ton of other ingredients you don't want. Three, the delivery process is dangerous, especially with the e-cig controversy the CDC is still working up now. So I would only go for the medical cannabis if you qualify, or if you really qualify, cancer, HIV wasting syndrome, muscle spasticity of MS, you can actually get prescription CBD THC. The only problem is I've seen when some patients have used this, a couple of mine, and I've seen the reports. Most people don't like this. They'd rather do their own blend from the street or the medical dispensary. Marinol is dronabinol. It's mostly THC, delta-9 THC. And Sesamet or Nabilone is also released in the U.S. It's an analog of THC. As I mentioned, Epidiolex is mostly just CBD, purified, I believe, from hemp. So these three are approved for use. And the only question, or the only problem, I believe, is that if you look at the NIDA, I believe, National Institute of Drug Abuse, has or can cultivate the federal plant, or the plant that's watched by the Fed, and the plant is supposedly only has about 3% THC versus medical cannabis dispensaries have like upwards of 20 to 30% THC. So there's a higher footprint in the medical cannabis world than there is with the prescription. And I don't know that you have the options to dial up or dial down. You're stuck with these. And they're a little bit expensive if you ask me. So hopefully with more research, especially with GW Pharmacy putting Epidiolex out, you'll have more acceptance and then maybe finer tuned, maybe not with these companies, but you'll have other cultivators improve their delivery system and the product. So hopefully in time, but not just yet. There is one that's approved in Canada, but not yet in the United States. It's for MS, muscle spasticity, and it's kind of cool because you just spray it under your tongue. I don't know what it tastes like. That might be a deal breaker for some people, but it's nice because you can also use it for kids if you're okay with that. There was one called Rimonabant that was released in Europe. Trying to touch on the receptor for appetite suppression, and it did work. People lost appetite, they lost weight, but they also committed suicide. There was a high rate of suicide, so it was withdrawn in 2009. So how do we, so common applications that I see in my clinic would be muscle wasting of HIV, these are the approved ones, muscle wasting of HIV, nausea and vomiting of chemotherapy, and muscle spasticity. Usually it's MS. So some of the non-FDA common applications would be nausea, appetite stimulation, sleep, and mood control. So these are the common ones that you don't normally see, but with the big diseases up here, you will have a lot of this stuff anyway. So that's what we can probably extrapolate out to people who don't have big diseases, because there's a lot of people that are just like the walking dead. They don't have a cancer, they don't have a terminal illness, but they have a really debilitating condition, which is, if you look at the Illinois medical cannabis compassionate use, there's more debilitating conditions. I'll show you that later, at least 49 I believe now. So my suggestion for getting dialed in, if you choose to go the next step in the medical cannabis card, there's two ways, and I'll explain that later as well. But my idea, for those in the audience that already had their card, was to, number one, list your top 3 issues. I put that on everybody's medical record. What are the top 3 issues right now? Because if there's somebody that comes in with fibromyalgia, PTSD, arthritis, Hashimoto's thyroiditis, sleep disorder, then there's a whole bunch of other things. And sometimes if you don't remember or keep a focus on the 3 tops, another priority will set itself up, and then you have to chase your diseases or your symptoms, which I find with a lot of fibromyalgias. Now, a lot of fibromyalgia sufferers have multiple diseases, so if you try to quiet down one, the others will become noisy, and then you'll have to say, oh, I gotta pay attention to the next one, and you quiet down that one, and the other ones become noisy, so you never effectively take care of and destroy or control one symptom. You're always hopping around, just like the trigger points of fibromyalgia. You always have one that's hotter than the other depending on how bad things are. So you keep track of your top 3 issues and you keep on hammering at the top 3. You do one thing at a time. So I always like to go conservative. If you're going to use your product or try a product for the first time, do not change anything else in your lifestyle. As far as eating, your current medications, your exercise routine, your sleep time schedule, and you add that one thing. So my biggest example was sleep. It's so easy to impact sleep. I have a 70-year-old, an 80-year-old that do this for sleep, and they don't get high. So that's why it's so fine-tuned. I love the way this plant is being developed. But you just do that one thing for 5 to 7 days at the same time, at the same dose, and you see the effects. And you have to keep a journal of your effects. So it was nice at the conference that Verilife gave these journals, cannabis journals, for keeping track of your effects, the name of the product, the dose of the product, and how you progress, because things will change. Your age will change, disease process or priorities will change. You might go from severe disease to moderate disease, and that'll change too. That'll change your reaction to your current medicines. You might have to change that. So it's important to keep a journal. You don't have to go that deep into it, but it's important to keep it because, especially with sleep disorder or a lot of pain, memory will be kind of halted or impacted. So it's going to be hard to remember this stuff later on down the line. Essentially like having a young person start to cook. If you don't keep a track of your recipe and how to use the ingredients, then the next time you go to cook, you might forget and you'll waste a lot of ingredients when you go back into that dish preparation. But if you bring out that card, my mom used to do it all the time, my wife does it, bring up that card and see the ingredients, see the cooking time, you'll always prepare as best as you can the same dish as before, no matter how far down the line or no matter how many people you're taking care of. So keep the cannabis journal. The biggest symptoms to watch out for, essentially getting high, but I don't like the word high, fatigue, dizziness, and memory issues. If you have any of those things, you might be a little bit too heavy on the THC of whatever product you're using. And that means you have to dial it down. But if you have a side effect, usually you have to talk to your representative or your doctor. The unfortunate problem is not a lot of my colleagues do this, so I think that the patients I saw, or at least the people I saw in the audience, some of them are kind of on their own, and don't think you're on your own. But it's important to have the research done and learn too. So I would also say we build a background level of CBD in the blood, and whether that's a priority or sleep is a priority, it doesn't matter. Different people have different priorities, but I think most people with chronic disease have a sleep disorder or a sleep disturbance. So if you can impact sleep easiest first, then I'd do that just so that they get riled up and say, this is great, and then they get involved with the second and third top priority, right? So if you can also build up a level of CBD in the bloodstream, that would be one of the priorities, because that helps with arthritis, helps with cancer fighting, helps with inflammation. So it helps with Hashimoto's, autoimmune disease. So you don't feel it. That's the only problem. With CBD, if you have a decent level, 2 to 3 times a day, I think that gives you, based on the elimination time that it takes for CBD to leave the bloodstream, it gets degraded. I think if 2 to 3 times a day is affordable, you do that on a regular basis. And don't expect that you're going to feel your arthritis turn around in a week. 5 to 7 days is the trial, as I mentioned before. But I'm just looking for side effects during that level or that part of your experimentation. If you can get a CBD, like, and I'll show it later, like a Matter at 250 milligrams of CBD to only 16 milligrams of THC, or a Vexia Relief at 14:1, that means 14 CBD, 1 THC. And there's other ones out there that are dominantly CBD, but if you can get a level of CBD in your system, in your bloodstream at all times, you start up twice a day, maybe 3 times a day, and you keep on increasing till at least you get to a level that's going to be hard to determine. So some of the classic or some of the limited studies show that if you can get a level of 100 millimolar per liter, but it's hard to test, and I don't know any testing facility unless you're doing a study. So kind of have to wing that one, and that's a tough one. But if you can at least get a regular dose, CBD in the morning, CBD at night, with whatever your dispensary offers, I think that would be important. If you can do it 3 times a day, especially on bad days that you're suffering or bad weeks that you're suffering, that would be important for life. Just like saying most people in Chicago will have a vitamin D deficiency. Don't stop your vitamin D in the Chicago summer. Summer here is only like 2 months. Continue vitamin D all year round. Just make sure you get levels checked to see that your product is taking care of your deficiency and it's not overdosing your deficiency. So just like vitamins, I'd say CBD should be a vitamin. And if you can get as little THC as possible, then you won't have to worry about that forgetful, dizzy, or fatigued feeling, the high feeling. Now, everybody responds differently. There was somebody in the audience that that said she used hemp-based CBD, and she had a little bit of fatigue with it. Everybody gets affected differently. And as you remember that picture of the receptors, CBD from hemp should not cross into the blood-brain barrier to affect CB1 receptors. CBD from hemp should essentially just affect CB2 receptors, mostly immune system and gut. But some people could have a placebo response, some people could have a nocebo response. So everybody's a little different, but that's the beauty of this plant, is you have to dial it in. There's no one formula. In fact, at this point in time, even for kids, you cannot dose it on a milligram per kilogram basis, like we do with antibiotics for kids or adults. We say, okay, how much does the kid weigh? Let's just give this amount, 100 milligrams per 1 kilogram of body weight. You can't do that with medical cannabis because it's so... the combinations of CBD, THC, the delivery system of the product you're using, whether it's digested, under the tongue, smoked, vaped, topical, depends on how thick your skin is, depends on how dry your skin is. There's so many variables. I'd love to just use oral forms, but because many people have a problem with their digestive system to begin with, and they're taking a lot of medicines that are bogging down the liver, you might have unpredictable levels. That's why overall, maybe day to day it'd be hard to figure out what levels you're chasing, but overall, if you can just get 2 to 3 times a day dosing, I think that should be reasonable. And then you can play around with the THC part, which causes higher side effects as far as the high, I didn't like to call high. So sleep, I would say that's the fastest thing you get done, so take care of the sleep as best as you can first, because it's just so refreshing. It's sometimes, if you have chronic disease, whether it's PTSD or cancer or autoimmune disease or fibromyalgia, you just take care of the sleep and a third of the symptoms go down significantly. So it's probably the easiest to touch, but some people don't have an issue with sleep or don't think they have an issue with sleep. Improve the day just a little bit, because you have to be careful about side effects. Those of you who are on the fence as far as having terrible disease and having a lot of symptoms, sometimes if you throw something into your lifestyle, like CBD or THC, it might push you over to a bad level. So you have to be careful. Fibromyalgias always respond hyper or over the stimulus, and they usually have, if there's going to be a side effect, that person's going to have the opposite reaction to it. So, and then eventually, when you're ready and life is good, then you wean off your prescription medicines, but you can't do that without the help of a doctor, like myself or the pain clinic. Specifically pain medicine, there has been nice information that the medical cannabis stimulates parts of the brain called a mu receptor, mu receptor, parts of the brain that opioids stimulate. So those of you who are worried about opioid addiction or have a loved one with opioid addiction, this, with Donald Abrams' information, was shown to, if you looked at patients who had opioids and they got started with medical cannabis, the level of opioids decreased in the bloodstream. So whether that was interpreted as they stopped or decreased their medicines of opioids while they were on the medical cannabis, or whether the medical cannabis improved the way the opioids got digested, hard to say. But bottom line is that most people can be moved off, and I have a handful of patients who have been able to get off of opioids significantly or successfully. It's growing since we just became legal for medical cannabis, but I'm sure I will accumulate more as time goes on. Then when you're ready, you re-attack your lifestyle. Again, you have to be careful, but I'll talk about that in a little bit. So it's important to know, as side effects do happen, what rescues you can take advantage of. And this is a picture of Neil Young. Neil Young came up with the rumored anecdote that he had for medical cannabis overdose or being in the couch. And it was lemon and black peppercorn. So I've tried this before, lemon, a whole squeezed lemon in a glass of water with 10 black peppercorns ground up. And I tell you, that was really sour and really astringent at the same time. So it was pretty nasty. I actually got this. This is from Wholesome Health Pharmacy. This is hemp-based CBD only. Technically, there's 0.3% THC in any kind of hemp, or milligrams in any kind of hemp. But that's essentially negative. So sometimes the use of CBD and or these terpenes will neutralize, not 100%, you're not going to reverse your high feeling immediately, but it'll neutralize further degradation or bioavailability of THC that you ate. So it does help, or going to sleep. What you don't want to do is drive home when you're intoxicated, whether it's from alcohol or some other herb or some other drug or medical cannabis. So that's why it's important during the 5 to 7 day experiment times to not be doing taxes or heavy computations or taking board exams or going to a wedding or detoxing. You don't want to do that. You want to test it out when you probably can either go to sleep because you did too much, or you're not going to be involved in a lot of life-changing decision-making times. So this is where I had Mike Alexander, who works at VeriLife in Arlington Heights, describe some of the application process. And part of that was people who had interest in considering the certification. We had to go through how, and if you have any of the 49 diseases, I'm sorry these are so small, but you can look on the Illinois Public Department of Health, IDPH, and you can find debilitating conditions. So it was first called the Compassionate Use of Medical Cannabis Pilot Program on Debilitating Conditions. There used to be 40, now they added 9 more in the summer of 2019, and they'll probably add more as time goes on. So if you have any of these diseases, you can access the long card and have a caregiver designated too. If you don't have these diseases, then you can essentially use just narcotics as your way in, but I'll get to that in a second. So I also had a question, name one debilitating condition from this, and I had patients just well, most of them knew fibromyalgia. So severe fibromyalgia is here. Seizures are also here. Great information on seizures, especially Dravet's or Lennox-Gastaut. And there's a whole bunch of other ones, cancer, unfortunately, and chronic pain. Chronic pain. A lot of people have chronic pain automatically. Now, what qualifies as chronic pain? That can be arbitrated. But if you fit any of these things, including traumatic brain injury, which concussions fall under, then you can take advantage of this card. So if you can't, then we go with the OAPP card, as long as you have had either an opioid prescribed to you, and the window of prescription is arbitrated too, as far as it's not stated under the state rules. So I have to interpret that myself. But luckily, part of the application process online for the doctor part, when I do this in the office, when you come in, it says, does the patient have an opioid prescribed, or could the patient have an opioid prescribed? So usually my default is the patient could have an opioid prescribed. Because a lot of my patients don't want to use opioids just strictly because of the side effects. And a lot of the people in the audience also just got turned off by opioids. Opioids help, no question. My mom used it when she was in her final days of pancreatic cancer. I remember she wasn't really there when I went to visit her, and that's a shame because I think if she had this opportunity, she would probably have done a lot better with being more engaged instead of being essentially hypersomnolent all day. Both of these things, the opioids definitely took her pain away, but it also took her consciousness away. The dialing in of medical cannabis in California at the time that she was going through pancreatic cancer probably would have been a lot better, but we couldn't take advantage of that. So in retrospect, I saw her suffer. I still have issues with that here, but if I have anybody here going through the same thing, not only will I highly suggest medical cannabis for its symptom reducing issues and properties, but also because it has been shown, if you remember the cell death slide, there have been studies that are showing benefits in glioblastoma multiforme, in breast cancer, even in stimulating a gene called IR1, I believe. So new information is saying that with advanced breast cancer, if you use a cannabinoid properly, it'll stop the metastasis by quieting down that gene. The information is new, but still, what's the downside to this? There is no downside, except for being couch-locked with fatigue, forgetfulness, and maybe a little dizziness. But if the downside to dying soon is that, I would take that in a heartbeat over just sleeping all day from opioids, and getting constipated from opioids, and vomiting from opioids. So, anyway, sorry, you can tell that I'm really passionate about this because I think a lot of my boomers are apprehensive. A lot of my baby boomers are apprehensive because of thinking about Cheech and Chong. A lot of my young people are probably not experiencing the disease processes. It's the people in the middle, the middle-aged folks with kids and fibromyalgia and working 50 hours a week and poor sleep and probably poor nutrition because of the poor sleep, making them hunt and crave for crap, that are suffering, that would really benefit from this. And I've seen it turn around a lot of lives. Getting my folks back into the productive life and social aspects of what we're supposed to do to contribute and live a healthy life and take care of our kids, instead of have obesity and pain and be on disability and have the kids take care of them. So anyway, that was the application process. That was essentially the culmination of the entire talk. And I guess went on with, especially with Dr. Jiwan. I wasn't able to, Derek Jiwan is a botanist with molecular plant background, who also worked for the USDA, and he gave his interpretation or his experience with plant-based compounds, the future of medical cannabis in medicine, the future of sharing research, which seems to be, you would want to share the research, but because it's still the category of the medical cannabis is still outlawed according to the Fed. No, but it's all privatized information, and it's taking forever for these people to share their information, which I think once we have a national database and everybody just pours in the research, then you'll have an exponential logarithmic improvement in the data for doctors to be comfortable with prescribing. We're not even taught this stuff in medical school. Who knows why? Maybe the boards now are starting to ask the questions of the young people, but it's a shame. It's a great plant and it can't be used properly. So I'd always say you have to have proper gut health, you have to have proper nutrition, because both of these help in the absorption process. There are studies that show if you have altered gut health, that again, because the CBD2 receptors are in the gut, if you get the right amount dialed in, you can improve your gut. For those of you who have IBS-C, constipation, or IBS-D, diarrhea, or just pain, this, if you use the thing properly and then you dial in your food, dial in your probiotic use, you can have this reverse itself. Proper nutrition is important because there's data that shows a lot of the endocannabinoids that we're supposed to make are based on omega-3 oils. And if we don't have enough omega-3, and I've done videos on omega-3, whether you have a plant-based diet or whether you just take a lot of fish or whether you just take the fish capsules or the flaxseed, that boosts up the response of your endocannabinoid system. Proper sleep is important. Controlled suffering is so important. You get from one disease process into a lower category of that rating of the disease. So if you go from severe fibromyalgia to fibromyalgia, it doesn't sound like much to you folks who don't have fibromyalgia, but trust me, when you go from pain and headache and nausea every day and irritability every day to maybe a little bit of a headache, you can become more productive, more interactive. People will see you differently, and if they see you differently, you can work or interact with more ease versus always being irritated, uptight, hangry. So that's what happens when you're underslept and in pain. And I always say, once you control the disease, as I mentioned earlier, it's time to work. And you have to put the due diligence in. But understanding that whether you have cancer or fibro or sleep disorder or PTSD, if you start to work on the treatment plan, whether it's physical therapy or psychotherapy or getting to see a nutritionist, you can flare up your symptoms again. So be very careful. One of the ladies in the audience, Emily, also had fibromyalgia, and she told me that when a chiropractor did a TENS, that's transcutaneous nerve stimulation, did a TENS unit on her trigger point, and she has the same trigger point as me on this side, that it actually flared her symptoms up, and that's just with electric stimulation from a chiropractor's office. So even the smallest innocent thing can actually flare up the disease process depending on how bad you are, teetering into better versus worse. And if you're on the fence and something is too stimulating to you, you get pushed that way. Hopefully, if you dialed it in properly, 5 to 7 days at a time, and you keep on adding a little bit, starting low with dose and then working your way up, you'll be able to use experimentation to dial in your specific dose so that you can control your specific symptoms. Once you know your specific symptoms and your dose, because you kept a a cannabis diary or journal, then you can always go back to it in case you flare up. So that's that first aid routine, and I have a video on that too, so I'll post it down below. So that was essentially my talk, and hopefully this will give anybody an idea about how to at least take care of or expect the medical cannabis might be able to help them. But I also wanted to show, I wasn't able to show these pictures, but these are pictures of products that you might run into when you go to the dispensary, because in Illinois you don't actually see the product. You just have to be described the product and look at the menu. No pictures. So here's some pictures. This is Canatol. It's a nasal spray. I'll try to adjust. I can see that it's a little bit bright, but Canatol is a nasal spray. It's okay. I wouldn't use it for allergies. I might use it as an alternative way to get THC into your bloodstream. So that's one way. This is the typical vape. This is a G6 vape, and this is the vape pen. There's a cartridge here that looks like that. You inhale, the battery here heats up the oil, and the oil gives you the active cannabinoid. This is a Vexia Relief, which I love. 14-to-1, not the other one, Comfort, but this is 14-to-1. And you can see here 2.5 milligrams of CBD per tablet. So if you break that down into half tablet twice a day, it's not much, but it's a start. And you can work your way up. But again, this is the 40 tablets of this is like 35 to 40 bucks. So that should account, if you do it half tablet twice a day, for a month. And 35 bucks for a month, 40 bucks for a month is like what I pay for expensive oils, flaxseed and yeast-based oils, or fish oil when I used to take fish. But I think that's reasonable. Going higher than that, 80 bucks a month for a full tablet twice a day, depends. Sometimes I would say do it if you are in a lot of pain, you went to rehab or you just worked out, maybe do it, but go back to maintaining it half tablet twice a day. That's one option. There's also another one I'll show you later. This is topical lotion that you apply to your trigger points or your areas of pain. If you're an arthritis sufferer, you can put it on your hands. But this does have pepper in it, and pepper or capsaicin burns the eyes. You have to be careful about rubbing your eyes afterward, or petting your dog afterward, or having a dog lick your hand afterward, or eating too. So be careful, but it does work as far as the heat. If you like heat, which a lot of my older patients like, might be cool. If you're an athlete, you might like ice, which will be a little bit different, or cold. This is the other Vexia product. It's 2-to-1. That's a little bit different. You want a higher amount of THC. This is a good product. Inflammation and calming. This is another form of a vape. This is the Cresco Lime. This is essentially just sativa. There is no breakdown of the ratios, which I'll talk about in a second. You should know ratios. And again, if you keep your cannabis journal, you'll develop a knowledge base about how to interpret ratios or read those little tiny prints. But this is just sativa, so there is no ratio. It's just the plant, the whole plant. And you're going to hope that with the oils from the plant or the flower, the bud, that you will get you what you want, but there's a higher chance that you'll have unwanted side effects. And maybe that's what you want for sleep. But again, it depends on how many other issues you have and how long it lasts in your system. If you use it at 10 o'clock at night and it's still in your system in the morning, that means you can't drive, you might be in the couch, maybe dial it down a little bit. This is something called CBN. So CBN is one of those cannabinoids that if you purify it out of the plant, it specifically comes from oil, you can actually have just sleep affected. Some people like it, some people don't. It's in capsule form, so it's a lot easier for older patients to understand. I don't think that young people might do it this way, but and it's a little pricey. Each of these has like 10 capsules in it, and I believe it was like 40 bucks, but 10 capsules, 40 bucks. If you do it for a whole month, that's 120 bucks. It could be a little expensive just for sleep. I think there's other options available, but nice alternative. This is one of the gummies. It reminded me of, well, it looked like candy. One of my patients brought this in. Smelled like candy, looked like candy. It was kind of big. I don't think you can actually put it on your tongue. I think you have to just eat it and have it get into the stomach. And once it gets into the stomach, the liver digests it and makes metabolites, and then it affects you. So you have to go through all that. So the question was brought up during the conference, does eating or empty stomach help? And it does affect the absorption. Eating with a fatty meal sometimes gets the THC, CBD in better, but then eating with too big of a meal might slow down the absorption and the effects on the liver, because the liver has to take care of processing other things. So plus minus. And that was indica. So you can see indica here, and in the last one you'll see sativa here. So sometimes just the high school level understanding If you see indica, it will make you sleepy. If you see sativa, it'll wake you up. And in the conference, I went on to describe the sativa plant. It grows in a harsher environment, so it has to be hardy, stimulating. The indica plant grows in a more lush and calming environment, so it's calming. That's why indica, indicouch is the acronym or the saying. There's the 1-shot and 3-shot bottles. It gives you a certain amount of THC mostly. These are novel, almost to appeal to the, 5-hour energy people who like shots like that. But again, it has to go through the stomach and the liver. Even though it's a shot, I don't think it'll get absorbed that fast. So the shot is usually, I interpret, when I used to take alcohol or shots, you have a shot and you have experience within 5 minutes. Here, I don't think you'll have that. If you're lucky, maybe, but if you have an empty stomach, maybe, but I think it'd be very unpredictable. But it is kind of cool. And this is the cool part. So Mary's Medicinal Muscle Freeze is the first thing I tried in Colorado. I experimented, and it really cools down the whole body. I put it over my whole body, unfortunately, but now I think my patients that have sleep issues and insomnia and hot flashes, this is nice because it can take care of the hot flashes and deliver a little bit of CBD. Theoretically through the skin, but I think the absorption is a little bit limited, if you ask me. And this is the other Matter high dose CBD. It's got 250 milligrams of CBD and 16.7 milligrams of THC. So if you want that baseline amount of CBD in your system, this is nice. And it even comes with a measuring as far as how much. So while you're taking your notes on your cannabis journal, you can keep on, you use the 5 to 7 day rule of applying the same amount on the dropper. Because it's hard to read these droppers and you have to tap it down. So it is nice. I don't know how much this costs, but you also see the breakdown on the front of the bottle as far as other cannabinoids like THC, THCA, CBD, CBDA. It's nice when you have the printout. This is the same thing I mentioned from Matt. This is from hemp, not regulated by the FDA, and with the JAMA article that was released, I think 2017, they tested like 84 brands of over-the-counter hemp CBD products, and only 41, it was around 40 to 50, had nothing in, not even 1% in the ingredients in the compound or in the liquid or tablet. So that's very discouraging. So it just goes to show you that I'd rather have you guys go for medical than over-the-counter street. And this is the rescue I talked about earlier. These are the guys that also presented. There's also candies that are chocolate coated, and here's gummies. Here's under the tongue mist spray, and then this was how you read those. You should get used to reading the labels. It's important. Again, more labels. And this is the dark chocolate everybody was ranting and raving about. It's by Gold Leaf, but it's dark chocolate sea salt. It's for my female patients for some reason. 50s, 60s, and 70s, they love this stuff. I would start with a quarter of a bar every night for 5 to 7 nights. Test it out, no other changes. If it's not good enough and you still have problems with sleep, do a half a bar and then keep it working your way up until either you have good effects or you have side effects. If you have side effects off the bat, then you can't use that or use a small amount. This is Mindy's Kitchen, nice product too. This is hard candy, not good for your teeth. Watch it, don't bite into it. I'd rather have you take the gummies. And this is Popsicle. You gotta be careful because if you have it in the freezer and somebody comes and visits and they think it's a popsicle because it's hot out, you're going to get intoxicated with that. Or if a kid takes it, God forbid. So you have to be careful about your product. You have to be willing to keep it under lock and key, keep a count, don't advertise it, I would suggest. And if you have teenagers in the house, they always get tempted, don't tell them or hide it. This is also used as a drink that you pour into your carbonated drink, and it's a nice way to deliver it. And I think, yes, this is the last vape form, mostly CBD. The other one was sativa. This is CBD, is specifically 4 to 1, so more for my inflammation guys. This is also a tincture you put under the tongue, liquid, again with a dropper and measured, mostly CBD, a little bit of THC as well. And that is pretty much it. So hopefully you benefited from this talk. Don't forget to subscribe to me. Put some comments down below if you have more that you'd like to hear about. Next time, try to make the lecture. I know a lot of people couldn't, but I'll try to advertise and post it again. So hopefully this is helpful. Pass it on, please, if you have anybody that's on the fence or not dialed in. And otherwise, I'll see you at the next tutorial.